Hello, everyone. We would like to thank you for coming to today's webinar, Strategy Execution, A Proven Path to Results. My name is Daniel Dipple of Passageways, and we're honored to have Stuart Levine here with us today and a special guest, Stephen Rosenthal, who Stuart will be introducing here in a moment. So a little housekeeping before we begin. We will be sending a copy of today's presentation to everyone by email, be later today or tomorrow morning. And there'll also be a link to the webinar recording in that email. So then also during the webinar, feel free to post questions in the little chat box you see there, and we will compile those, and at the end, the Q&A session will address as many of those as we can get to. And lastly, at the very end, when you're leaving us today, there'll be a short survey. Really appreciate if you could take a few minutes to complete that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Stuart R. Levine. Stuart is the chairman and CEO of Stuart Levine and Associates. His management consulting firm has been developing strategies for organizations over the last 20 years. But unlike a lot of consulting firms, they help ensure the actual success and execution of strategies. And then also involved the company, part of that company of EduLeader. It's an online digital learning company that helps individuals and organizations to achieve success. And they have various programs there they currently have or in development. And he's also has served and still does serve on a multitude of boards. And last but not least, he's an accomplished best-selling author. I'm sure some of you are familiar with his 3 leadership books that have sold over 1.2 million copies. And the main one there is the 6 Fundamentals of Success, which was a Wall Street Journal bestseller. So with that, Stuart, I give it to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Daniel, and I'd like to add my welcome to our participants who, by logging on today, are doing what we think is the most important part of strategy and culture, which is learning together. The topic that we're talking about today is how to achieve results with some clear direction, clear strategy. And our content expert that has joined us today is Steve Rosenthal. He is presently a Senior Vice President of Population Health Management at Montefiore Health System, and as well as the President of the Care Management Organization. He is a recognized national leader in his ability to develop strategic plans and execute them, with over 25 years of operational experience. I think what's interesting sometimes when we talk about healthcare, the scope of the responsibilities, and I know today as we look at the participants who are joining us, people are fintech area, financial services, credit unions, healthcare. But healthcare, it seems to me, is an issue that touches all of our lives, whether it's personally, our families, or our employee base. And in preparing our work with Passageways, it seemed like a very appropriate conversation. And so to get a certain, I will call it, context about Steve's responsibilities, the system itself, Montefiore, has in its area, its population, over 3.1 million people that touch about 1 million patients, 30,000 employees, and 5,000 providers. So you kind of see, and on an annual basis, close to 5 million ambulatory surge visits. So when we talk about a responsibility, nothing is more important to us as individuals than our family's health, our employees, our neighbors' health, as well as our organization. So with that as an introduction, Steve, let me formally welcome you to the conversation today, and we appreciate your time and your thinking.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Steve. The next slide will talk about strategy and execution, because as we will talk shortly, you can have the best strategy, but if you can't implement it, if you can't execute it, then I'm not so sure how you, in Steve's case, really effectuate your mission and get it done. So when we talk about strategy, we're talking about a process, and to get the results you need for patients, it's through inclusion. It's about getting a culture that really understands your strategy and your direction so that you can have the type of impact that you need, and then pushing that up against the technology alignment, because we all understand that that really is an underlier to performance. And so when you look at strategy, direction, and for our purposes today, inclusion, because Steve obviously has weighty P&L responsibilities, how do you build the inclusion so that that employee base, cross-functional, when we talk about words like patient navigation, everybody has a sense. Now, one part of our webinar series that we think is very important is to kind of encourage the people that are on the line with us through poll questions, and we'll have 4 of them today. The first one that will come up is, has your organization embraced your vision, mission, core values, and value proposition? And Steve, as we get ready to ask and invite our participants to join us, if I ask you that question, how does your organization really engage in a conversation about a vision, a mission, and core values to, I'll call it, incorporate the thinking of people throughout that very large organization?
Well, it's such an important aspect of this journey, and I emphasize the fact that it's kind of a journey. The process of inclusion and leadership clearly begins at the top of the organization. And since I've been in this industry, healthcare, for the majority of my career, one of the opportunities is to certainly look at organizations that carry the same values as you, where you may want to work. And it seems that one of the collective benefits of organizations, particularly that deal in the service industry, often there's a culture. And I think the challenge often is, how do you disseminate that information across the organization? How do you develop clear strategic initiatives and build that structure throughout? And it begins at the top, and then it moves through the management structure with clear accountability, clear communication, and a real goal that can be measured at the end of that journey.
That's pretty interesting. So here's what I heard you say, Steve, and I want to give people a chance to now just tell us what they're thinking. So Daniel or Kaneko, can you put the slide up that gives people a chance to share their feelings on their organizations? And here we go. So Steve, are you surprised? So we asked the question, has your organization embraced your vision, mission, core values, and value proposition? 42% yes, 48% yes but not enough, and 10% no. So Steve, what thoughts do you have when you look at that data response from our group today?
Well, I think it's pretty consistent. I think it's very difficult to move that along, but clearly there's an enormous focus on it within the organizations, and people have begun to really, I think, understand the importance of a clear vision and developing the proposition around value and competency. So I'm thrilled to see that opportunity. But the recognition and the fact that it's not enough, I think, is very exciting.
It certainly lays out, let's call it the opportunity, Steve, because I know we've had discussions in the past, you and myself, about patient outcomes. And when you really study sentinel events, and that is a case where a patient, I'll call it unfortunately, does not survive in a hospital and it's reviewed, communication invariably becomes one of those issues. And I wonder if you can take that and push that up against this yes but not enough in your experience and what you feel professionally every day.
Well, I think it's a challenge, and I think individual organizations, because of the complexities and the historical development of individual components within it or silos within organizations, take time to break down. I think one of the novelties about being in the population health arena as I am is that we really look at the continuum of care, and so silos are not functional in that environment because it's really a continuous process. And I think as people begin to explore the value proposition and core values within their organization, they realize the importance of the different areas within their company and how there needs to be clear communication and interaction between them. So I think as they begin to focus on those opportunities, they begin to see the benefits of it.
You know, it's interesting, Steve. Yesterday we had a meeting of our team, and we were talking about that very issue of how do you break through the silos, and I'll call it enlightened self-interest. And one of the ways relates back to where we started the conversation, which is establishing a vision and a mission, the purpose of why we're together, which kind of has people think about subjugating their individual will by maybe 5%, in your case, to focus on the patient outcome. How would you respond to that?
Well, you know, patient outcomes clearly are a measure of success in an industry that's dealing with the health of the population. So clearly outcomes become a pivotal success factor, and there really needs to be a rallying around, since so much of the delivery system is based on quality initiatives and the handoffs between the component parts of the delivery system. And so I think those opportunities become that much more paramount when you're dealing with individuals' health or life.
Right. And so the next slide talks about why strategic plans fail. And you go through the list and you see poor organizational alignment, a lack of clearly defined strategic drivers, a lack of what you touched on a minute ago, Steve, deficient strategic communication, no common language, ineffective translation of strategic planning goals, and a team that does not have the ability to respond. Because when we talk, Steve, about strategy, if you go back probably 5 or 6 years ago, a strategic plan had a shelf life of about 10 years. To us now, in our firm, we talk about strategy. You know what? It's about 2 years. I don't know how you'd respond to that.
Well, you know, I think that that's an important aspect of the strategic planning process. It's a living document. It's a living process. And although we have established a strategic plan for our organization and for the areas of responsibility that I have, it's continuously refreshed and reviewed in the context of the changing market, the changing environment. You know, one of the things that's occurred at the Montefiore Health System in the last 2.5 years is we've acquired 7 institutions. That expansion is an enormous undertaking, both financially, let alone operationally, and have grown to over 30,000 employees in that period of time. So that's a process where clear language and a clear pathway for delivering that message needs to be established, and you need to constantly revisit the goals and objectives established within your strategic plan.
So, Steve, when you think about the consequences of not getting right in your profession, which is an adverse impact on a patient or a family member, what type of regularized, let's call it strategic communication, do you deploy in your professional responsibility to ensure that the people in your area are really understanding the mission, understanding what they're held accountable for? How does it look, and what do you do to transmit those values?
Well, there needs to be regular communication, and there needs to be some way of measuring how one is going about achieving those goals, and so that accountability is visible. So there are, dashboards and other analytical tools that we use to measure quality, to measure outcomes, to measure patient satisfaction, to measure the financial performance. And through that process, you're continuously communicating what the opportunities and the goals are, and you're linking that on a regular basis to your overall strategic initiative, because they're all tied together very intimately, and are balanced in such a way that you get the benefits on a real-time basis. And people begin to create that accountability for themselves and for their team members as they begin to better understand how those component parts interact with one another.
It's interesting, Steve, based on some of our earlier conversations, if in fact you build a culture that is grounded in really smart communication, then that culture component of your strategy becomes a strategic weapon and for the recruitment, excuse me, and the development of your best people. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, that's probably one of the greatest strengths of being clear in this process that we've just been discussing. I've been extraordinarily fortunate in that I've had very little turnover over the last 20 some odd years of my most talented members of my executive team. And I think in large part it's because of clear messaging, appropriate accountability, and success. And the success is kind of bred by those measures that we were just talking about. So I think that continuous process, that continuous discussion, and getting through that process with people on an individual basis as well as a team really begins to solidify the opportunity around your strategic focus.
So Steve, on the notion of the next slide talks about, what do you think is the most important role a leader can play in strategy execution? As you look at your day-to-day responsibilities, what do you think the most important part of your responsibilities are in the execution of strategy?
Well, I think alignment is critical, making sure that there's a clear set of deliverables and associated with the challenges that are in front of us. So making sure that they're aligned with our goals and objectives. And then kind of making sure that there's really a clear set or a single set of communication or conversation, so that as the message is being delivered throughout the management team and down to the associates, there's a clear understanding of what they were trying to accomplish. And my ability to communicate that clarity is an important tool. Then of course the whole leadership development piece is that I have to take the folks who I think are the folks who are going to be replacing me and nurture them so that they can and or replace the individuals that make the most sense at that next level, because you want folks to feel as though there's growth and there's opportunity. And so that is the other important aspect, I think, of leadership.
And I think somewhere in there, if you just probe it, because again, strategy and implementation requires a tremendous, I'll call it, commitment to listening internally to your own people, your own team, and then externally to the market. How do you ensure that you are hearing what your own people are feeling, and then put that into your, I'll call it, business planning cycle?
Well, I mean, communication is critical around that, and so I listen. I spend time throughout the organization on a regular basis listening to challenges and issues that I'm concerned about and they're concerned about. So I hear what's going on, and I attend outside meetings and participate in initiatives that are going on in the industry. And since the organization is an industry leader, I get the opportunity to be with those folks who are having impact. And so that gives me tools and information and energy to come back and share that experience and keep that communication loop going. It's not a single bullet process. There's no magic bullet to the process. It's a continuous process, and you need to create the accountability amongst your own management team for them to do the same thing. And that just allows you to reach many, many more people and get more information fed back to you.
So poll question number 2 is, have you developed an effective strategic communication plan that strengthens culture to deliver results? And your options are yes, yes, but not enough, no, but progress being made, and no. And Steve, how do you think our participants are going to respond to that today?
Well, if it's consistent with what they thought their first button was, I think perhaps we'll see the majority in the yeses, and I'd like to see that, but it'll be interesting to see what the outcome is.
Yeah. I think that as we see the evolution driven by technology, Steve, I think that strategic communication changes very rapidly as well. Because maybe, call it 3 or 4 years ago, a 2-page white paper was incredibly important. Today, it's 5 bullets on half a page to reinforce, right? It's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's see, Dan, do you have some results in that we can share with everybody on poll 2? So here we are. Have you developed an effective plan? Yes, 10%. Yes, but not enough, 53%. No, 29%. Steve, what conclusions do you come from looking at that data?
Communication is not easy. That's what I. But I think you're right. I think there's so many areas and avenues today as forms of communication that it's almost as though you have to look at all of them simultaneously and come up with a pathway or process for each. So I'm beginning to see that it's not easy. It's really not. Well, I've always known it wasn't easy, but clearly so everyone is agreeing with us.
And I would say, Steve, when we're out there doing strategy at our firm, if there's one issue that becomes the gating factor to a successful implementation without regard to industry, it's, do we have a defined strategic plan? And if in fact, call it the large percentage of people that are saying there's a huge opportunity, that actually is affirming why we see strategic implementation plans cratering. And I'd remind everybody, by the way, if you have some questions and you want Steve's or my thinking, you should shoot us a fast email. And let's go to the next slide, and thank you for responding to that question. So here is a schematic that talks about a strategic business planning process. And I would draw your attention to the upper right-hand column, which talks about the foundation processes and the creation of core values, the vision and mission and value proposition. And I'm always struck by the paucity of getting common language around those issues. Steve, do you have any point of view on, I'll call it, those foundation processes in your world of strategy?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of the strategic components, or part of one of the elements of the strategic plan that I think we spent the most time on, just the creation of the language around core values. Because it's one thing to establish a core value, it's another thing to create the language that allows you to communicate it. And so those elements actually took the most time, and the iterative process was quite astounding. So I can, because once you sit down and think about it and you relate it to the industry that you're in, there are so many variations on a theme that you can craft that the language becomes so critical. So I could believe that, that it is a challenge, but I think it's so important because it drives everything else. Spend the time on that, and the rest of the process moves much more smoothly.
Okay, so Steve, just for clarity's sake, what you just defined was, I'll call it, an inclusionary part of a strategic plan. Going through a definition of what core values in our world, beliefs, the vision, the aspirations, the mission, the purpose, gets people thinking at the right level about the right issues. So sometimes it is, I'll call it, tiresome, but I'll tell you, that extra couple of weeks really gets people to a common understanding, you know? And,
Yeah, no,
and
I
the,
agree. I actually remember a time where, we kind of tortured over the mission and value proposition language for like, 4 hours with the most senior members of the organization in the room.
Mhm.
We literally had to take a break for a week and come back and kind of rethink it, because it really got to the point, as you pointed out, it got hard and it got tough and kind of difficult to come to a conclusion. So you needed a break almost to refresh your thinking.
And I would just one other point on this schematic where we talk about an internal organizational assessment. And for me, that data becomes the burning platform. When I was CEO of Dale Carnegie, the global training organization, we needed a burning platform. We needed a reason to get a new strategy going, and it came in independently driven assessment and data that was collected so that people could effectively, somebody else held up a mirror and said, gee whiz, your tie is not straight or your hair is not in place and so forth. And that independent data collection in the organizational assessment, to me, gives you a better chance of developing a strategy that also, I think, acknowledges people's thinking, you know? So.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It's also sometimes I think you discover things you didn't actually know before, as you begin to take the parts of your system and actually understand them and measure them.
Yeah, 100%. So the next slide talks about effective strategic planning process, and we talk about broad ownership, we talk about accountability and so forth. Steve, can you talk to us a little bit about how you create broad ownership in such a diverse workforce? You go from incredibly gifted clinicians to incredibly gifted people in your call center, handling information, coordinating patient engagement and patient navigation. How do you get that broad organizational understanding and inclusion of your strategy? What do you do to make that happen?
Well, it's a learning process and an iterative process. You try to do it in parts that you can bring together in a connective way that creates the understanding, and relate it to things that are most important. So, the contact center's initiatives relate basically to patient engagement. And what's important about patient engagement is the patient's experience as they navigate through your complicated healthcare system. So how do you begin to think about it from a population's perspective, or from the other person's shoe? How do you begin to think about your business model and how that customer is relating to it? And so you do that in all aspects of your organization as you meet with the management team and as you communicate to folks outside your organization about what you do and how you do it. And it takes time, and it takes consistency, and it takes clarity, and it takes simple words and repetitive processes to bring that all together over time.
So when you look at your call center, in general terms, how many contacts do you get on an annual basis in your call center? What's the data point, would you think?
Well, just incoming calls, let alone the calls that are made to outreach to patients for other tops, is probably about 2.5 million contacts.
Okay, so that 2.5 million, which is 2.5 million people and their lives, that's a big number.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you put that up in an accountable way so every one of us who's on the phone or in that call center working through technology understands how well we're doing, if you know what I'm saying?
Well, there's from a data perspective, there's a dashboard that reflects their performance, and potentially even surveying the customers to understand what they perceive the experience to be. But we want to make sure the phones get answered within a reasonable standard time. We want to make sure that calls don't get abandoned. We want to make sure that the customer gets the information they're actually looking for. So that, healthcare is a very nuanced business. Even within a particular specialty, there could be multiple layers of nuance within that specialty of people who are special at some special specialty. And so I think in the context of that, you're looking at data that's giving you a clear understanding of how well you're performing. And then based on that data, you either make corrective action plans or you build on opportunities as you look through that. And then you manage the programs in relationship to the bigger picture, and you assign accountability. Right. And that's ultimately the process.
If I could just observe, I think the one data point that you touched on, vis-a-vis abandonment, is really a huge, I'll call it data point, because when people are so frustrated that they just drop off, that really tells us quite a bit about our own accountability and culture, right, Steve? It's interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and the issue of patience, getting services in a time frame. And when you're talking about your health, clearly you don't have any patience.
Exactly. It's really interesting. So the next slide talks about how do we ensure the success of all parties needed to execute the strategy. And I think circling a lot of them, certainly the evolution of people and their thinking. And poll question number 3, I think will give us a window into what everybody on the phone is thinking about, which is, have you provided your team with the appropriate leadership development to increase their skills to deliver results? And the response is yes, but not enough, no, but progress is being made. Steve, how do you think people are going to respond to this question?
I'm beginning to think that in this particular area, you're going to see a little bit more weighted to the no's, but in progress. Yes, but maybe not enough, and very few in the yeses. Be interesting to see what it looks like. I'd like to hope.
Yeah, I'm interested as well. We're involved in a big cultural transformation right now, and with even the most senior people having the ability to talk leadership skills that, let's call it 5 years ago, were great, but today, based on a more diverse workforce, different technology, those leadership skills have to come under review. So, Daniel, with your help, let's see what we got on question number 3. Okay, so 14% yes, but not enough. 52% no, progress is being made, and no, flat out 7%. Steve, how do you respond to that?
It's kind of what I thought it was going to say. I think we're doing as much as we can, but we should be doing more. And so I'm happy that there's more yeses than I thought there might have been. But I still think that we need some way to go on that, because in my experience is that leadership really needs nurturing and guidance, and helping folks to develop those skills and offering that to key members of your team really gives you the ability to improve and increase their skills, and ultimately it ends up delivering a much better product for the overall organization. And it shows you care, and you've got to focus, and that you're accountable as a leader to actually make that happen. I've seen lots of experiences in my own organization where we've not done that in a timely way and have not benefited from the talents of folks that have come and gone.
And I think part of that, Steve, relates to, accepting, if you're, like yourself, very senior leader, taking the responsibility for yourself to continue to evolve, and then for your people, and then getting content and experiences that really help people continue to evolve with their own leadership skills. In our world, that's a good conversation,
Oh no, so, I personally think it's critical. It's too complicated a world not to do that.
That's right. And you know what, Steve, it's really interesting. I had this conversation with a colleague a week or two ago. It's not just a question of sending out the most current edition of the Harvard Business Review that's 20 pages in length, because at the end of the day, if the content is not on point, not helpful, then I think it's not about just killing some innocent trees, if you know what I'm saying. All right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I agree.
So, yeah, so we go to the next slide, Conoco, and that's the path to results, the structure that you think would facilitate our success. And I go to the next one, which is the business plan implementation, that schematic, which is kind of interesting because once you get that strategic plan approved, then making sure that you have a project management team that owns the responsibility for the data collection so that you can see just and measure how well you're doing. Measuring becomes, I think, a critical component and something that does not get enough attention. And Steve, I'd be interested in your thinking on the notion of developing charters for the committees. Have you had experience in that one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. They become very critical. They provide focus, and they provide a linkage in many ways back to the strategic plan. Because remember, you're now introducing something perhaps that wasn't completely intuitive to the folks who are working on that management team or project team. And so developing a charter becomes a critical focus. It's kind of like a little mini vision for that team's focus on what their goals and objectives should be.
Right. And for clarity's sake, when we talk about the charters, it comes out of our work with boards of directors because a charter defines what does that committee do, what's its responsibility, and how long. Because absent that, it becomes some amorphous conversation that never gets you the clarity that you need. And periodically, one of the things we found was helpful is you form an ad hoc committee, which, by the way, has a shelf life of a certain gestation period. And then on the lower left, where we talk about the processes to support the CEO, we talk about regular status updates. Steve, you want to, in a public world, right, publicly traded world, we have quarterly reports to the street and so forth. What's that look like, those status updates look like in your world?
Well, I mean, I think they're very similar. I mean, the status updates straddle all of the various components of the project initiatives. So there are milestones, and so you're giving a status update on that. There are always dashboards associated with metrics, whether we're looking at an individual hospital performance, a network performance, a health plan performance, all dealing with metrics, and that everyone's building a communication plan to share that information. And very often you find that many of our key executives do get some coaching because they need to deal with the change. And often change, as everyone knows, is difficult to deal with. So I see these as being very important regardless of the nature. We have boards that ask for the same information, so not any significant difference other than stockholders.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's still about results, right, Steve?
It's all about results, exactly.
The next and the last poll question is, if you can bring that slide up, talks about, do you have the IT systems and collaborative software solutions in place to help enable successful execution and measurement of results? And Conoco, if you don't mind, can you just put the options up? So yes, but not enough. So Steve, how do you think people are going to respond to this question?
It's interesting. I'd like to, I would go with yes, but not enough, and no, but planning to improve as the areas of dominance in the report. But it is industry by industry, so depending upon who's on the phone, could be different.
Right. We certainly know in the credit union space where the customers, quote, are members, maintaining secured, I'll call it relationships with people. It has the same HIPAA implications for you, Steve, in the healthcare world, okay? And see what the data comes back from our participants. Conoco, if you can put that slide up, that would be helpful. Number 4. Okay, so do you have the IT systems collaboration software? Yes, 7%. yes, but not enough. 22, no, but planning to improve. 59 and 12, no. Steve, how do you respond to that?
Well, it's kind of what I was thinking. I was expecting, the capital challenges and the integration issues associated with technology and software development, in my own experience, is extraordinarily complicated. And the system language and communication between products and systems is improving, but different industries have had different success. In healthcare, it's been a real challenge. But if you look at the financial industry, I think you see a different story there. But I think in healthcare also we're challenged by the capital commitment required to actually implement technology, particularly when you're a system as large as ours. You're talking about, something like 30,000 users, and that becomes a very expensive undertaking.
Right. Interesting.
But critical.
Yeah, for sure. Next slide talks about how do you create accountability. And I can tell you, Steve, we're getting a series of questions on. Please comment on the differences for the board and management and in the development of strategy and execution. And so I would say at a high level that the board is responsible for participating in strategy, and then I will call it measuring and holding senior leadership accountable for the results. And so on a regularized basis, if a board goes what's in my world below the line, then they're probably violating common sense on governance. I don't know how you'd respond to that, Steve.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. I think their responsibility is really in understanding and holding management to the deliverables and the accountability.
Right.
They offer their insight, but I think their job is making sure that we deliver.
And I think what the board's further responsibility is to stay current, to understand, call it new technology evolution, new healthcare protocols and things like that, bring them to a strategic discussion, and then participate in a discussion with you, Steve, as a senior leader in understanding the deployment of capital, human capital and financial capital, and the risk associated. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, there's always risk, and capital is not always an easy thing to acquire.
Right, exactly. So then, questions for you to ask, and I would remind you, I know Daniel said it at the beginning, we're moving fast through a lot of data now, a lot of information. You can get these decks, and particularly schematics, at the end when Daniel takes you through the wrap-up. If you just put a note that you'd like hard copies of this material, we can get it your way. But questions to ask: is your leadership totally aligned with your organization's ability? Does your organization, do the people there understand their roles? And I would say to you, Steve, as a leader, how do you ensure that your leadership team is aligned around your organization's vision? You're obviously running a successful unit, but how do you ensure that?
Well, one is you obviously measure the outcomes of the things that you're trying to accomplish, and the folks who are accountable for that will obviously drive the success or lack thereof of it. So you understand it through that. And then, of course, clear communication, expectations, goals, and objectives that we meet on and discuss on a regular basis and deal with the challenges that they're facing. The management team is responsible for a great deal of activity, and so you need to give them the opportunity to share their challenges and goals with you.
And the last bullet on this slide talks about the plans in place to develop and increase the leadership capacity and accountability of your team. Do you do that on a regularized basis?
Yes. As a matter of fact, we're just going through a very similar process where we've rewarded folks for their success and leadership and built in new accountability for those who have achieved that success to take in more responsibility. And then obviously that provides them growth both in leadership as well as in compensation. And those are ultimately the driving rewards of ultimately being successful in your strategy development.
was talking to a very senior client yesterday about this very issue where if in fact we're going to, I'll call it strengthen the next round of high potential leaders and so forth, that we should make that part of the annual review process for the top 5 or 6 officers of that corporation, if you know what I'm saying, and tie it in to that annual review. Sounds similar to what you're talking about. Next slide, please. We're coming in here for a landing. Do you have a strategic communication plan that ensures and sets a rhythm for communication? And how do you ensure, this is a strong word, Steve, standards of behavior to set the foundation? How do you ensure those standards for behavior?
Well, you know, you first of all, you have to set an example. So you try to set the example of what that behavior standard is, and get people to feel a level of understanding and comfort with that standard. And then, you know, you reinforce and reward when those standards are met in the ways that make most sense to your management team. Just continuously build on those objectives and goals with them. So you need to play an important role in the development of their leadership skills during this period of time.
You know, it's interesting. We didn't spend a lot of time about the word values. Okay, so when you look to acquire talent, when you look to recruit people, how does the discussion about values work its way into that recruitment process, Steve?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think it probably plays a much greater role than we give it often credit for, because ultimately you want to be, you want the individuals that you're recruiting, particularly in senior positions, to have very similar values as the organization and as the management team. And you can tell very quickly whether there's alignment there, usually when you're speaking with somebody during that process. So I think you be completely transparent, and you talk about the organizational culture and the expectations in the process, and learn what their experience and overall core values are during that discussion.
And I think it is a conversation, right? And don't go into data denial. You know, I had a conversation this morning with colleague in Washington, D.C., and really with technology, you can check me out in 2 seconds. I can check you out. And when you put your brand, Steve Rosenthal, and Montefiore on the line, you can really do some great good, or you can do damage based on who you associate with, right? And so, go ahead. Yeah, please.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I think you have to be very careful that the individuals that you associate with and become part of your network of relationships, that they have very similar core values, or else there's dissonance when you're trying to accomplish your goals.
Yeah. Well, I think there's been an enjoyable conversation. Again, I want to acknowledge my colleagues and friends at Passageways. I think, you know, we talk about values. In my experience as a board member, getting information that is secure and reliable is so important to me. That's why I enjoy my association with Passageways. I know that's their core values, and sharing information is so important. And to my colleagues at EduLeader, who really have dedicated their lives on developing learning, which is something Steve was talking about, the evolution of people in a pretty effective way through technology-driven learning, which helps drive that process forward. Having said that, Steve, thank you very much. Daniel and Conoco, thank you. And I want to turn it back to Daniel for some closing thoughts, please.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Stephen. It's been great. Thank you, Stuart. Really appreciate it. Just real quick, and kind of interesting, talking about culture today a lot. Our product onboards, board meeting management solutions, some people call them board portals. They do help strengthen the culture for creating more accountability, control, and security and governance for mainly, particularly board meetings, but we have lots of people that use our product for committee, executive, and other meetings. And the thing that's really important here is for building just that basic agenda and board book. You can do updates in real time, push that out to people, anytime, anywhere. They can pull it up on their device. We lead the industry by having compatibilities. You'll see kind of the image there. Everything from iPhones and iPads to Android phones and tablets, Microsoft Surface even Amazon Kindle, and of course desktops and laptops. And so the thing that's important about that is on any one of the devices, so if you have 3 of them, you can be able to have the latest board meeting materials, and surveys can be conducted, e-signatures can be done on documents, voting. So there's a lot of power that can be carried around with you and or used in the office. So with that, if anyone's interested in learning some more, I'd really appreciate it if you'd reach out to us. You'll see the email address there, more@passagewitz.com. And Stuart, again, thank you for kind of guiding us through this all. And Stephen, I really, it was very informative, and I really appreciate you participating with us here today.
Thank you.
Oh, do we have a survey, Daniel, for people to?
Yeah, at the very end here, just last housekeeping. I mentioned at the beginning. So when you're leaving us today, there'll be a short survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could just take a few minutes to fill that out. It helps us for deciding topics in the future, and also gives you an opportunity to request any information from us.
Good.
So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today, and again, thank you, Stephen, for taking time out of your day, and Stuart, it's always been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Bye.
Stuart. Bye-bye now.